Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work at a warehouse job that's pretty demanding, but the pay is decent and I get good time off. I've been a gamer my whole life, started with the original Nintendo when I was 7 and never stopped. Gaming is basically my main hobby and stress relief after long shifts, moving boxes and inventory around. When Nintendo announced the Switch 2, I immediately put my pre-order in at the local game store. I've been saving up for months, setting aside $50 from each paycheck. The employees there know me pretty well since I buy most of my games from them instead of ordering online. I like supporting local business, and they always hold the good stuff for regular customers. I had specifically requested 4 days off work when the console launched. My supervisor wasn't thrilled about it, but I've been working overtime for weeks and had vacation days saved up. I was planning to marathon some games, order pizza, and just decompress from what had been a really stressful month at work. So there I was, walking into the store right after my shift ended. I was still in my work clothes, tired but excited. The girl behind the counter recognized me immediately and asked if I was there to pick up my Switch 2. I told her yes, and she went to grab it from the back storage room. While I waited by the counter, this woman walked in. She had that look, like she was already irritated before she even opened her mouth. She walked straight up to the other employee and demanded a Nintendo Switch 2 for her son. He apologized and explained that they were completely sold out but offered to put her on the pre-order list for their next shipment in about 2 weeks. She refused, insisting she needed one today. The employee patiently repeated that they literally didn't have any left since everyone who pre-ordered had picked theirs up and they'd sold their few extras that morning. The woman demanded he get one from the back anyway. He explained again that there weren't any in the back because they were completely sold out. Right then, the first employee came back with my Switch 2 in its bag. She handed it to me with a smile and told me to enjoy my time off. I thanked her and said I definitely would. That's when the woman's attention turned to me. Her eyes locked onto my bag like a hawk spotting prey. She asked if she could have it. I honestly thought she was joking at first and asked her what she meant. She clarified that she wanted the Nintendo Switch because she needed it for her son. I told her no, explaining that it was mine and I pre-ordered it months ago. She started going on about how it was for her son who had just gotten all A's on his report card and how she'd promised him a Switch 2. She insisted he deserved it. Now, I've been on Reddit long enough to know exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. I'd read tons of stories about entitled parents trying to guilt people into giving up their stuff, so I decided to play her game and told her this was actually for my son too, and that he got all A pluses, so he deserved it more. She got angry as she claimed that was impossible because her son was the smartest kid in his class. I said, okay, good for him, but this was still mine. I started walking toward the door, but she followed me outside. The arguing continued in the parking lot. She kept insisting I didn't understand because she'd already promised her son and couldn't go home empty-handed. I suggested maybe she should have pre-ordered one like everyone else. She complained that she didn't know they were going to be so popular. I pointed out that it was Nintendo, so of course they were going to be popular. Then she offered to pay me double what I'd paid for it. I told her it wasn't about money and that I'd taken time off work to play this thing. She got nasty and asked what kind of grown man takes time off work to play video games, calling it pathetic. I replied that I was the kind who works hard and deserves to enjoy his hobbies. She kept going on and on about how her son needed it more than I did, how I was being selfish, and how she was going to call the store manager. My allergies had been acting up all day because of the high pollen count, and I could feel my sinuses getting worse as we stood there arguing. She launched into another rant about how she couldn't believe how selfish people were these days, and how her son had been looking forward to this for months. I said so had I. She argued that I was an adult and could wait, but children shouldn't have to suffer because adults were being greedy. That's when I felt it building up, that familiar tickle in my nose that meant a big sneeze was coming. Usually I grab a tissue or at least turn away, but I was so fed up with this woman's attitude that I just didn't care anymore. I sneezed hard, right in her direction. It wasn't pretty. We're talking a full force, allergy fueled explosion that covered her face and upper chest. For a split second, we both just stood there in shock. I apologized and said that COVID was really kicking my butt today. She started sputtering and wiping at her face with her sleeves, calling it disgusting and saying she could get sick. I suggested she should probably go wash that off and maybe hit up an urgent care clinic too, just to be safe. She gave me the most furious look I've ever seen and stormed off toward her car, still trying to clean my sneeze off her face. I didn't stick around to see what she did next. I practically jogged to my car, tossed the Switch 2 in the passenger seat, and got out of there as fast as I could. When I got home, I set up the console and spent the next hour playing Mario Kart, trying not to think about what had just happened. Part of me felt a little bad about the sneeze, but honestly, she had it coming. My sister and I used to be close. We're only 2 years apart, and we shared everything growing up. But when she moved out for college and then got her own place across town, something changed. She became this whole different person, like she was too busy and important to maintain normal relationships. It started small. I'd text her about family stuff or just to catch up, and instead of getting a response within a few hours like normal people do, I'd wait and wait. Sometimes 2 days would pass before she'd send back a one-word reply like, okay or cool. Other times, she'd just leave me on read completely. I started wondering if I was being annoying or texting too much, so I cut back. But even when I only reached out about serious things, the pattern continued. The worst part was watching her post stories on social media throughout those same days when she was supposedly too busy to reply. She'd be at restaurants, hanging out with friends, posting pictures of her coffee, clearly on her phone constantly. But my messages, those could wait apparently. Then there were the emergencies. Well, her emergencies anyway. Her phone would buzz with my name, and suddenly I was expected to be available immediately. She texted me one day saying she needed help with something urgent and asking if I was there. I replied asking what was wrong. She told me she needed me to call our mom about some insurance thing because she needed the policy number right away for a doctor's appointment. I said I'd call mom for her. This happened over and over. When she needed our mom's contact info for something. When she locked herself out and needed me to drive 20 minutes to bring her the spare key she'd left at my place. When she couldn't figure out how to submit some paperwork and needed me to walk her through it step by step over the phone. Every single time I dropped what I was doing and helped. Because that's what family does, right? But the double standard was eating at me. I was her personal assistant when convenient, but a low priority contact the rest of the time. The breaking point came last month. I texted her about our dad's birthday plans, asking if she wanted to go in together on a gift. Radio silence for 3 days. Then on Thursday, my phone started buzzing at work. She texted me about an emergency, asking if I could pick up her prescription because the pharmacy closed at 6 p.m. and she was stuck in a meeting until then. I saw the message at 5:30 p.m. I literally left work early, drove across town to her pharmacy, picked up her medication, and dropped it at her apartment. She texted me just thanks 2 hours later. That weekend, she finally responded to my birthday message saying that whatever I thought was fine for the gift. No acknowledgement that she'd ignored me for days while expecting immediate help when she needed it. That's when I decided I was done being her backup notification system. I wasn't going to be mean or petty about it. I was just going to match her energy exactly. The first test came pretty quickly. My phone buzzed on a Tuesday afternoon. She texted asking if I had our mom's insurance information. I stared at the message. Normally, I would have replied within minutes with all the details she needed. Instead, I put my phone down and went about my day. 24 hours later, I responded saying I just saw her message and asking if she still wanted me to send the info. She replied that she still needed it and asked me to send it right away. I waited another hour before sending the information. She didn't say anything about the delay. A few days later, another opportunity presented itself. She asked if I could pick something up for her while I was out, saying she'd ordered something for pickup at a store near me. I was actually planning to go to that exact shopping center that afternoon, but I waited until the next day to respond, telling her I was sorry and that I would have helped if I'd seen the message earlier. She just said it was fine and that she'd get it later. I kept this up for weeks. Every message from her got the same treatment I've been receiving for months. 24-hour delays minimum, sometimes longer, if she'd been particularly slow with her own responses recently. I never mentioned what I was doing or made it obvious. I just quietly maintained the same pace she'd established. The funny thing was, I wasn't angry anymore. When I stopped expecting immediate responses and started treating our communication like the low priority, whenever convenient thing she'd made it, I felt so much better. I stopped dropping everything for her messages. I stopped feeling guilty when I saw her name pop up on my phone. I just dealt with her texts when I felt like it the same way she'd been treating mine. After about 6 weeks of this, something interesting started happening. Her response times got faster, not dramatically, but noticeably. Messages that used to take 2 days were coming back in 12 hours, then 8 hours, then the same day. Last week, she actually called me instead of texting about something important. We had a normal conversation that didn't involve me waiting days for basic information or her expecting instant service. She texted asking if I wanted to grab lunch over the weekend. After my usual 24-hour wait, I said sure and suggested Saturday. She replied that the new place on 5th Street sounded good. I waited 6 hours before agreeing that it was perfect. She hasn't said anything about my slower response times, and I haven't mentioned her faster ones. We've just naturally settled into a more balanced rhythm. Turns out when you stop being someone's emergency contact while being treated like their least important contact, things have a way of evening out. I'm not her backup notification system anymore. I'm just her sister, responding when it's convenient for me, just like she always did. And somehow that's working out better for both of us. My daughter is in 8th grade at Lincoln Middle School. She's always been a good student, never gets in trouble, and her teachers love her. I'm a single parent working as a nurse at the local hospital, so I work long shifts, but I always make sure to be involved in her education. Her father passed away 3 years ago, so it's just the two of us now. About 2 months ago, the school got a new principal. The previous one retired after 20 years, and everyone loved him. This new woman came in acting like she owned the place and wanted to change everything immediately. Parents started complaining within the first week about her rude attitude and strange new rules. The trouble started on a Monday morning. My daughter came home that afternoon looking upset. I asked her what was wrong and she told me the new principal had given her detention for the next day. When I asked why, she explained that the principal said her skirt was too short, but it was the same skirt she had worn all year and it followed the dress code perfectly. I checked the school handbook that night. The skirt was definitely within guidelines. I decided to call the school the next morning to discuss it. Tuesday morning, I called the main office. The secretary answered and I told her I needed to speak with the principal about my daughter's detention because I thought there had been a misunderstanding about the dress code violation. She put me on hold and said she would transfer me. After being on hold for 10 minutes, the principal finally picked up. I explained that I was calling about my daughter's detention and that I had reviewed the dress code policy. Her skirt met all the requirements, so I thought there might have been a mistake. The principal told me there was no mistake and that my daughter had violated dress code and served her detention properly. I pointed out that, according to the handbook, skirts needed to be at knee length or longer, and my daughter's skirt was below her knees. She said she didn't need parents questioning her judgment and that my daughter would serve another detention that day because of my disrespectful attitude. I asked her how asking a question was disrespectful, but she hung up on me. That afternoon, my daughter came home even more upset. She told me the principal had given her another detention for the next day and said it was because I had been rude to her on the phone. I was furious, but decided to handle this through proper channels. I called the district office and filed a complaint. They said they'd look into it within a few days. Wednesday came and I decided to pick my daughter up right after school to avoid this ridiculous third detention. I arrived at school at 3:15 right when classes ended. I walked to the main office to sign her out. The secretary asked if she could help me, and I told her I was there to pick up my daughter and take her home. She asked if my daughter was in detention. I said she was supposed to be, but I was taking her home instead because this whole situation was ridiculous. The secretary looked nervous and went to get the principal. A few minutes later, the principal came walking out of her office. She told me that my daughter was serving detention and could not leave. I said that actually she could leave because I was her parent and I was taking her home. The principal insisted that my daughter had detention until 5 o'clock and that school policy said students must complete their assigned punishments. I asked her to show me where it said parents cannot remove their children from school grounds. She said she didn't have to show me anything and that my daughter was staying there. I asked where my daughter was right now, and she told me that was none of my business. I said it was absolutely my business because she was my daughter, and I demanded she get her now so we could leave. The principal said she was calling security to have me removed from the building. I told her to go ahead and call them, and that while she was at it, I would call the police and report that she was holding my child against her will. She said I couldn't do that. I told her to watch me and pulled out my phone to dial 911. When the operator answered, I said I needed to report a possible kidnapping because the principal at Lincoln Middle School was refusing to let me take my daughter home and wouldn't tell me where she was. The principal yelled at me to hang up the phone right away. I told the operator that the principal was now trying to prevent me from calling for help. Within 15 minutes, 2 police officers arrived. The principal tried to explain her side, but the officers weren't having it. One officer told her that she could not prevent a parent from taking their child home from school. The principal argued that my daughter had detention and that school policy clearly said she had to stay. The second officer said that school policy doesn't override parental rights and asked where the child was now. The principal reluctantly led us to the detention room where my daughter was sitting alone with a substitute teacher. I told my daughter to come on because we were going home. My daughter looked relieved and quickly gathered her things. The principal said this was unacceptable and that she was going to have us both banned from school grounds. The first officer told her that actually they needed to discuss her actions that day because preventing a parent from accessing their child could be considered unlawful detention. The officers took statements from everyone involved. The substitute teacher confirmed that detention was only supposed to last until 4:30. Not 5 like the principal had claimed. She also mentioned that the principal had told her to keep my daughter there as long as necessary, which sounded very suspicious. After reviewing the school's actual policies, the officers determined that the principal had indeed overstepped her authority. Not only had she violated district policy by extending punishments due to parent complaints, but she had also falsely imprisoned my daughter by refusing to release her to me. The second officer told the principal she was under arrest for unlawful detention of a minor and interfering with parental custody. She protested that this was ridiculous because she was a principal and had authority there. The first officer said her authority didn't extend to breaking the law. They handcuffed her right there in front of the secretary and several teachers who had gathered to see what was happening. The shock on everyone's faces was obvious. The district superintendent arrived an hour later. After reviewing everything that had happened over the past 3 days, he immediately suspended the principal pending a full investigation. It turns out I wasn't the only parent who had filed complaints. She had been abusing her power with multiple families. 2 weeks later, the district fired her completely. It all started when my husband's sister needed a place to stay while they were between houses. Her husband got transferred for work and they needed somewhere to crash for a few months while looking for a new place. Being family, we said yes without thinking twice. She had 2 kids, ages 6 and 4, and I figured it would be nice for my 3-year-old daughter to have her cousins around. I work from home and my sister-in-law doesn't work since she stays home with her kids. At first, I thought it would be great having another adult to talk to during the day instead of just chatting with my toddler about Bluey episodes. The first red flag should have been when she showed up with 3 full grocery bags of nothing but processed snacks: goldfish crackers, fruit gummies, cookies, chips, and those little packaged donuts. I asked where she wanted me to put everything, and she just started filling up my pantry and freezer like she owned the place. She explained that the kids get really cranky if they don't have their usual snacks. I told her that was no problem and mentioned that we usually just do fresh fruit and crackers, but I was sure the kids would love having variety. She looked at me like I was crazy and said her kids don't really eat that stuff because it's too messy and they don't like the textures. I should have known right then what I was in for. The real nightmare started with meals. I've always been a one pot, one meal kind of cook. I make dinner, everyone eats it, end of story. That's how I grew up, and that's how I've been raising my daughter. She eats everything I put in front of her, and if she occasionally doesn't like something, she just eats around it or asks politely for something else. But these kids, it was like they'd never seen real food before. The first morning I made my usual breakfast of scrambled eggs with cheese and some toast. My daughter dug right in. The two boys just stared at their plates like I'd served them poison. My sister-in-law told me that they don't really eat eggs and asked if I had any cereal. I said I had some granola and oats. She shook her head and said they need the sugary kind and not the kind that gets soggy. She explained that they like it when the milk is separate so they can control how much goes on. I watched while she served her 6-year-old dry Fruit Loops in a bowl with a small cup of milk on the side. The 4-year-old got the same setup but with different cereal because apparently he didn't like the colors in Fruit Loops. Every single meal became a production. I'd spend time cooking something normal, and she'd immediately start listing everything wrong with it. When I made spaghetti with meat sauce, she told me that her kids don't eat tomato sauce. When I make grilled cheese sandwiches, she said they don't like melted cheese. When I made chicken stir-fry with vegetables, she said they don't eat anything green, and the sauce was too weird. The breaking point came when I decided to make pancakes from scratch one Saturday morning. I thought for sure this would be a hit. What kid doesn't like pancakes? She looked panicked and asked what recipe I used. She explained that her oldest only eats pancakes from the specific mix she buys and that he won't eat homemade ones. She then made a huge deal about explaining to her 6-year-old that these were different pancakes and he'd have to try them. She practically convinced him they were going to taste terrible before he even sat down. The oldest kid complained that he didn't want these pancakes because they looked wrong. She told him he had to at least try one bite. The kid took the tiniest possible bite, made a face like he was eating dirt, and immediately started crying about how gross they were. Meanwhile, my 3-year-old and the younger boy were happily eating their pancakes without any drama. After that, I started cooking with way fewer vegetables and spices than normal, basically making the blandest food possible. But it still wasn't enough. Every meal came with a list of modifications. She asked if I could make half the burgers with no cheese and no sauce. Then she changed her mind and asked if I could just give him plain meat and bread, because he doesn't like when the flavors touch. Another time she mentioned that the kids don't really eat casseroles and wondered if I could maybe make them some mac and cheese from the box instead. She also explained that they don't like when their food is mixed together and asked if I could serve everything separately. I was spending twice as long cooking and making multiple versions of the same meal. My grocery bill doubled because I had to keep buying processed alternatives for every real ingredient I used. My freezer was packed with chicken nuggets, frozen pizzas, and other junk that we never usually ate. The worst part was watching my own daughter start to question the food I made. She began asking why her cousins got special food and if she could have chicken nuggets instead of the roasted chicken I made. I had to shut that down real quick. I told her this is what we're having for dinner, and if she doesn't want it, she can have a peanut butter sandwich later. She asked why they get different food. I explained that sometimes people have different rules in their families. But I was getting fed up. These kids hadn't eaten a single piece of fruit or vegetable in weeks. They lived on processed snacks and the most basic foods possible. Meanwhile, I was bending over backwards, trying to accommodate every bizarre preference, while my own family's eating habits were getting thrown out the window. The final straw came when I made sliders for dinner. Small burgers, simple and kid-friendly. I thought this would be perfect. She asked if I could make half of them with no cheese or ketchup, just plain meat and bread. She explained that her oldest doesn't like when he can taste anything but the meat. I made half the burgers exactly how she wanted. Plain meat, plain bun, nothing else. The kid still refused to eat it. He complained that he didn't know what this tasted like and that it might be different. She tried to reassure him that it was just meat and bread, exactly how he likes it, but he insisted that he didn't know if it tastes the same as the meat at home. That's when I lost it. I've been cooking bland, boring food for weeks, catering to every ridiculous demand, and this kid wouldn't even try a plain hamburger because he didn't know what it would taste like. I told her I was done and that I was going back to cooking normal food for my family. I said if her kids don't want to eat it, there's peanut butter and jelly in the kitchen, and they're old enough to make their own sandwiches if they don't like what I'm serving. She argued that I can't expect children to just eat whatever I put in front of them because they have preferences. I shot back that my child eats whatever I put in front of her because that's how we do things in this house. I told her I'm not running a restaurant and that I'm making one meal that everyone can take or leave. She said that wasn't fair to her kids because they're not used to eating this way. I replied that my kid isn't used to living on processed junk food, but I've been letting it slide because she's family. I made it clear that I wasn't changing how I feed my family anymore. The next day I made my usual dinner. Baked chicken with roasted vegetables and rice. I put plates in front of everyone and sat down to eat. The two boys immediately started whining about the vegetables and asking for chicken nuggets. My sister-in-law announced that they weren't going to eat this. I told her that then they won't eat, and there's peanut butter in the pantry if they get hungry later. She looked shocked, like I'd suggested letting them starve, but I was done. I watched my daughter happily eat her dinner, while her cousins sat there pouting. After about 10 minutes of dramatics, the 4-year-old actually started picking at his food and ended up eating most of it. The older one held out longer, but eventually ate the chicken and rice when he realized no alternatives were coming. She called the whole thing ridiculous and accused me of being mean to children. I told her I was treating them exactly the same way I treat my own child, and if that's mean, then I guess I'm mean. It took about a week, but both kids started eating what I cooked without the massive productions. They still weren't thrilled about vegetables, but they stopped acting like I was poisoning them. My sister-in-law was furious and kept making passive-aggressive comments about my strict rules, but I didn't care anymore. When my brother-in-law visited for a weekend at dinner, he watched his kids actually eating the roasted vegetables I'd made and looked shocked. He commented on how surprised he was that they were eating vegetables and mentioned that they never eat this stuff at home. My sister-in-law quickly explained that I forced them to eat it and that they don't have a choice. He looked at the kids again and said they looked fine to him and maybe they should try this approach at home. That's when I realized the real problem wasn't the kids at all. They were perfectly capable of eating normal food when they weren't being catered to and told they couldn't handle it. The oldest kid even told me later that he actually liked the roasted carrots, but his mom had always told him he wouldn't like vegetables, so he never tried them. When they finally moved out 2 months later, my sister-in-law made some comment about how her kids would probably have stomach problems from eating weird food for so long. I just smiled and told her I hoped they'd remember that they actually liked trying new things. The kids hugged me goodbye and asked if I could teach their mom how to make the roasted carrots. That was worth every single battle over dinner. I work as a data entry clerk at a small insurance company downtown. I've been taking the same bus route for 3 years now, and I know most of the regular passengers by sight. The commute is usually peaceful. I put on my headphones, blast some music, and zone out for the 40-minute ride. My mother raised me with old-school manners. She always said that respect costs nothing and goes a long way. So when elderly people get on the bus, I offer them my seat. When someone drops something, I help pick it up. When people are talking, I listen instead of interrupting. She also taught me that if you're going to gossip about someone, you do it privately, not in public where everyone can hear you making a fool of yourself. Today started like any other Tuesday. I got on the bus at my usual stop, found my regular seat near the middle, and put my headphones in. But for some reason, I didn't turn my music on right away. Maybe I was tired. Or maybe I was just spacing out thinking about the pile of claims waiting for me at the office. The bus made its usual stops, picking up the morning crowd. At the third stop, an elderly woman climbed aboard. She looked to be in her 70s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a floral print dress that had seen better days. She was moving fine, no cane or walker, just holding onto the handrails when she made her way down the aisle. Following my mother's teachings, I immediately stood up and gestured to my seat. I politely asked the elderly woman if she would like to sit down. She declined my offer and told me she was young enough to be standing. I nodded and sat back down. Fair enough. If she wanted to stand, that was her choice. I wasn't going to force politeness on someone who didn't want it. But then something weird happened. About 2 minutes later, this same woman who had just told me she was young enough to stand started talking loudly to the entire bus. She complained that young people these days have no respect for their elders and announced that I was making her stand on the bus while sitting there like I owned the place. I looked around, confused. Was she talking about me, the same person who had literally just offered her my seat? I kept my headphones in and tried to ignore her, figuring maybe she was having some kind of episode or maybe I misunderstood what was happening. But she kept going. She continued ranting about how the bus driver was going way too fast and how she was forced to stand because young people today just don't care about anyone but themselves. At this point, other passengers were starting to look uncomfortable. A few people looked between her and me, clearly confused, since they had witnessed me offering her the seat. I could feel my face getting hot with embarrassment, but I stayed quiet. My mother also taught me not to make scenes in public. Then came the classic line that every entitled person seems to have in their back pocket. She started going on about how, back in her day, men gave their seats to women, and how back in her day, people had manners and respect. I was doing my best to tune her out, but I could see that other passengers were getting annoyed too, especially the teenager sitting next to me. She was maybe 16 or 17 with dark hair and a school backpack on her lap. I had noticed her getting more and more agitated when the old woman continued her rant. The teenager's hands were clenched into fists, and I could practically see the steam coming out of her ears. She kept looking at the old woman, then at me, then back at the old woman. Finally, she seemed to reach her breaking point. The old woman was still going on about the good old days when the teenager suddenly snapped. She yelled at the old woman that, back in her day, if she spoke without being asked, she would be burnt at the stake. She called her an old hag and told her to be quiet because she was in public. The entire bus went dead silent. Even the old woman stopped talking and just stared at the teenager with her mouth hanging open. Other passengers were trying not to laugh, covering their mouths or looking out the windows to hide their smiles. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. This kid had just said what everyone on the bus was thinking, and she had delivered it with the perfect amount of teenage attitude and historical accuracy. The old woman sputtered about how she had never been spoken to that way and demanded to know how the teenager dared to speak to her like that. The teenager shot back and asked how she dared to lie about me when I had tried to give her my seat. She pointed out that everyone on the bus had seen me offer the seat and heard her refuse it. She told her to make up her mind about what she actually wanted. Other passengers started nodding and murmuring in agreement. A middle-aged woman across the aisle spoke up and confirmed that she had seen the whole thing. She backed up the teenager's story about how I had offered the seat and the old woman had turned it down. An older man near the front added his voice to the mix. He told the entitled woman that she couldn't have it both ways and that either she wanted the seat or she didn't. The entitled woman looked around the bus, probably expecting support, but found only disapproving stares and head shakes. She declared that the whole situation was outrageous and threatened to call the bus company to complain about all of us. The teenager told her to go ahead and call. She said she was sure the bus company would love to hear about how the woman had lied about a passenger who tried to help her and then disturbed everyone else with her complaining. At the next stop, the old woman huffed and puffed her way off the bus. When she was gone, several passengers started chuckling and shaking their heads. The teenager turned to me with a grin and apologized if she had made things weird. She explained that she just couldn't listen to the woman's rant anymore. I told her she was kidding if she thought it was weird, and that what she did was amazing. I admitted that I wished I had her guts when I was her age. She laughed and told me her grandmother always says that if you're going to be rude in public, you better be ready for someone to call you out on it. The rest of the ride was actually pleasant. A few other passengers came over to tell me they were sorry I had to deal with that situation, and everyone seemed to be in a better mood after watching entitled behavior get shot down so perfectly. I still don't know that teenager's name, but she became my hero that day. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.